Hello everyone. So I wanted to talk today about the topic of gaslighting, and I'm going to use the example of Amber Heard to explain this. So gaslighting, for people not aware, that is where you have something that you know for a fact to be true, not something you just believe, but something that you absolutely know, and other people convince you that you're wrong about it. And they do that by convincing you that you're crazy or there's something wrong with your memory or your recognition of it. And this is what is happening in some quarters in relation to Amber Heard. And we've gone from 95% of people supporting Johnny Depp to now being about 83%. Now, still the vast majority support him, but it is getting lower. And this is because of this gaslighting that people have been trying to do. Most recent version of which is this push by a number of women's rights organisations to say, well, the jury got it wrong, that it is misogynistic, it's wrong, it's bad, you shouldn't be suing people for making accusations of domestic violence, even if they're false. You shouldn't be allowed to do that. And that's what they're essentially saying. So the problem is, see, this was live streamed. Now, I can follow a trial by following the notes of the trial, and they usually do have them for most trials. They'll have the recordings of all the publicly available statements. Now, of course, some things will be suppressed and not available for public consumption, but you can get enough from what is shown to follow the trial. But having it live streamed and then also reported on by proper lawyers who regularly engage in commentary about these sorts of cases, it means that we really had a wealth of information to draw on, and we could draw our own conclusions. Now, that doesn't mean that we were there. And if you want to believe that that he hurt her in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, it is possible, and you're allowed to believe that. That's perfectly fine. And in fact, I often do encourage minority viewpoints such as that. But you have to acknowledge that in the trial, the evidence presented in that trial, I'm talking about the US trial, or the Virginia trial as some people call it, in that trial the evidence that was presented showed clearly and conclusively that Amber Heard was not hurt by Johnny Depp. And furthermore, it suggested very strongly that Johnny Depp was hurt by Amber Heard. Now, the main part of this was when his finger was chopped off. Now, her argument is that he did it to himself, but she gave about, I think, 5 or 6 different contradictory explanations as to how he managed to do it. And these were just simply not possible to all be true, whereas he gave one consistent argument as to how it happened and said it in a way that was quite believable. Now, we don't have absolute proof of that, but I think if she were to be charged with that, I would expect that a jury would probably find her guilty of whatever crime is associated with having his finger chopped off. And in that basis, it seems as if, like, based on the live streaming, based on the evidence that was presented, not only was he quite correctly found not guilty of doing anything to her, but that she was found guilty of doing something to him. And there were also the circumstantial evidence that was that she appeared to have hurt her sister Whitney, and also appeared to have hurt her, or certainly was witnessed hurting her ex-girlfriend, who she called her wife. So that's all consistent with Amber Heard being an abuser and Johnny Depp being the victim. And that is what was played out in court. Now, we don't know what happened in the UK trial because that was not live streamed. And even looking through the notes, it is a little bit hard to follow. It was made by a single judge, and that judge was criticised because they had a relationship with one of the people who were on trial. Amber Heard was not on trial. And so, look, but even if that judgment was fair, and who knows, maybe it was, there is no reason that this one can't be fair as well. In fact, they're not mutually exclusive, because all that trial in the UK said, it didn't say that Amber Heard was not guilty. All it said was that the newspaper that published her allegations did nothing wrong in doing so. And that could mean that she simply lied to the newspaper. And in fact, that is, if you combine the two verdicts, that is exactly what it says. The problem is, there's no problem with somebody who wants to support Amber Heard. If you want to support Amber Heard, you support Amber Heard. Go ahead. There's nothing wrong with having a minority viewpoint. Maybe you're right. And in fact, if you had watched the trial and you still believed that she was innocent in spite of watching the trial, fair enough, go ahead. Of course, we note that most people that support her didn't watch the trial. And most of the newspapers that supported her before the trial and just completely ignored what was said in the trial to contradict their views. And that's fine. You want to have those beliefs, you go ahead. The issue is, it's not any of that. That's all perfectly fine. You can have your minority viewpoint, and you are entitled to be wrong. If you're wrong, if that's the wrong opinion, that's fine. I'm not going to abuse you or belittle you for having an opinion that seems as if it's factually wrong. And I mean, history is littered with situations where the minority viewpoint ended up being the correct viewpoint. And who knows if maybe once this is fully investigated, if it does turn out that Johnny Depp abused her. But at this stage, there's just no evidence. There's no conclusive evidence that suggests that. If you look through the UK trial, all the bits that proved him guilty were unproven or disproven under further levels of scrutiny in the US trial. The US trial had it was a longer trial. There was more evidence available, and she was more compelled to speak about things. So she was held under much higher levels of scrutiny. It was a higher level trial. And all the bits that were proven to a certain level in the UK trial were proven to a higher level going the other way in the US trial. But it wasn't an appeal of the UK trial, and we have to recognise this. Because in the UK trial, it was trying to prove whether the newspaper did anything wrong. Amber Heard was a witness, she wasn't a party. And this one was trying to prove whether Amber Heard did the wrong thing. And again, this one was live streamed. And I think it was important to live stream it because of these potential criticisms. And either way, if he had been found guilty, there would have been criticisms that there was something wrong about, how men get an unfair run in court systems, which they do, statistically speaking. Men get an unfair run, completely unfair. 10 times as many men are in prison as women. This is completely unfair. But the issue is when you have these influential women's rights organisations who by all means should be supporting women's rights, and they then decide that you have to support Amber Heard as part of that. In other words, that if you want to support women's rights, you want to support victims of violence, you want to support women who are abused, that you have to support Amber Heard. And that's not fair. That's not fair. What if you had been abused? And let's say the example of Rihanna. And we all love Rihanna. I mean, the singer recently fallen pregnant who was abused by Chris Brown. And her face was bloodied and blue and awful. And everyone's seen the pictures. There's no question that Chris Brown abused her. I believe he went to jail over it. If he didn't, well, he should have. There's no doubt about that. And she has come out and supported Johnny Depp and allowed him to be in her fashion show. And then she's fallen under criticism. Now, if she's wrong, she's allowed to be wrong. Why does she have to be criticised for that? When the jury and all the evidence said that Amber Heard was the abuser. I think that's really unfair. And I think it's really unfair that there are these women's groups who have influence, who are saying to other women who may not have followed the trial, who may not have been all that interested in all the specifics of it, and saying to them, if you're supporting women's rights, you're supporting victims of abuse, you have to support Amber Heard. That's not fair. That's not fair. It's just, it's gaslighting. It's gaslighting. And there are people who watched the trial, who were well and truly aware that she was guilty, who have changed because of these lies. And that's not on. I'm not saying the newspapers doing the wrong thing. Newspapers often publish whatever they want to, whatever angle they want to push, and it's not always necessarily true. And that's fine. You balance together all the different newspapers, and between them all, you probably get a little bit of truth. But yeah, these women's organisations are supposed to be supporting women, and there are a lot of women who support Johnny Depp in this. A lot of women who were victims of violence who support him as a fellow victim of violence. And there's been a growing push to recognise that men can be victims of violence. Now apparently there's also a push by a lot of men to sue women for defamation when they've said things that are claimed not to be true, alleging domestic violence. Is that a problem? I don't think it is. I think all of these are positive steps. But the negative step is this one by the women's group. It's the gaslighting, it's wrong, it shouldn't be happening. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye bye.